Dan?
What's
The
that?
suggestion you make here is that these guys evolved from big boys to little guys
Right.
in as low as 150,000 years, maybe 250,000.
Well, we don't know. It could be that if we go with the idea that, say, a lot of the population of Pygmy Mammoths during the last glacial period were from Columbian mammoths of the last glacial period, could have occurred in just a few thousand years.
So is that, has there been any study about, is that really rapid? I mean,
That's pretty
by
rapid.
evolutionary scientific standards? I mean, it
That's
would seem to me that's pretty rapid.
That's a good question for a biologist, and there might be some in the audience here.
Yeah. No, I was just curious.
Yeah,
I've heard that things can evolve very quickly if you
Yeah.
have a change in where an animal is living. I mean, it can happen very, very quickly.
Oh, sure.
And so I'm just curious how that would compare to other rates of, that's a significant difference, but meaning before 4 meters and 2 meters.
Down to 2 meters.
Or
But,
6 meters.
but consider the Channel Islands fox
Yeah.
compared to the mainland fox.
Mhm.
And the oldest radiocarbon ages we have on Channel Islands foxes are around 7,000 years, is that in that ballpark?
Right.
They were probably brought over by humans as pets or alarm systems, or both. In St. Nicholas, both dogs and foxes are buried there, and that's where some of the oldest radiocarbon ages are, but on the northern Channel Islands they're about as old as well. And so that diminution of size occurred over just a few thousand years. So depending on what the resources are that are required for that animal, and what the rest of the faunal composition is, it's competing for those resources, and climate changes that may have occurred over the time period, and the stresses that those might have induced, who knows, but it's certainly possible.
Also, I thought it was interesting, you know, there's this theory about that the American prehistoric people killed off a lot of the big animals, but it looks like the pygmy elephants went extinct all over the world, at least in the last 10, 20, 30,000 years. In other words, we don't have any of them now.
Correct.
And presumably on Wrangel Island or in the Mediterranean, where you pointed out. I mean, is there any evidence that the prehistoric, as far as you know, I'm sure there's probably not, humans contributed to their demise all over the place?
This has been a debate that's been going on between paleontologists, archaeologists, and geologists for a long time. It is incredibly controversial. I gave a talk once on our reconstruction of the last interglacial period, the time period that corresponds to the second marine terrace here in Huron Canyon. But we had a study all over North America of what climate was like at that time, in the interior as well as on the coasts. And I pointed out that the the continental scale picture that we developed for the last interglacial period in North America was that it was much warmer than present. Sea level was higher. In Alaska, tree line migrated north, migrated west. Lots of evidence that things were warmer overall. And in fact, that's why we're studying it as a possible future climate analog.
Yeah.
So I said it's interesting to speculate. Here the large megafauna, which all went extinct near the close of the last glacial period, somehow survived a interglacial period that was warmer than present, followed by a glacial period, okay, followed by a minor sort of interstadial, or not quite glacial, not quite interglacial, followed by another glacial period. Then they enter a rather modest interglacial, and all of a sudden they decide, we've had it, that's it, I can't take it anymore, no more climate change, we're all going to die. And they all did.
And they all did, yeah.
So I said, can we revisit the idea that there was a human factor involved in North America and other places? And all the geologists said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And all the archaeologists raised their hands and said, you are so full of it, that is crazy, no way. So it's amazingly controversial. Ross McPhee had an intriguing idea, and that was that they did go extinct, but from human-borne diseases that were introduced into North America as the Clovis people or their ancestors migrated over. It's interesting to look at other records of places where humans migrated earlier, such as Australia, which is about somewhere between 50 and 70,000 years ago. Those migrations took place. That's when the big animals went extinct. But you won't get most archaeologists to agree with that.
Says the disease theory, though, I mean, it doesn't have to apply everywhere.
Well,
But
either
the
disease or
implication
function.
is the disease theory might apply all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
At different introductions to
Yeah.
human beings.
Yeah. It's a case of comparing the archaeological record to the megafaunal record. And there is enough overlap that's possible.
Mhm.
Archaeologists have argued that populations would not have been large enough to cause extinction on a continental scale. A disease could explain that, but don't know.
I think the evolution of the mammoth is going to be really, to Exilus or Xylus, is going to be really interesting to follow, because if there was more than one introduction, then I would think you would actually have two different lines of mammoths, so that the early Columbian mammoth could evolve to a smaller species.
Sure.
But the later introductions would not evolve to that same species. Instead, what you would have is evolution to another species.
Xylus sub 1 and Xylus sub 2
Yeah,
or something.
they could be both pygmy, but
Sure.
they would not, I don't see where you get the joining of those two. So you
Yeah,
have
maybe not.
parallel.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to look at.
Sure.
Are all the small mammoths necessarily the same species?
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's interesting. I used to think that species definitions were absolute things. That it turns out there's so many intergradations. And there's even a species that a lot of a North American mammoth that some paleontologists and zoologists recognize, called Muhs jeffersoni, named after Thomas Jefferson. And it turns out it depends on whether you're a lumper or a splitter. Some paleontologists regard that as simply a variation on columbi. Others regard it as a separate species. And it could be that, these different lineages that you're hypothesizing for Xylus could end up in that sort of a situation where it becomes, where they sort of look a lot like each other, but there's differences that, detail you can find, that are a function of that separate evolutionary pathway. Quite possible. And to test that, of course, you'd need to find a lot more of the old ones to compare them to. And that's been rare. But now that we know they're there, we can actually start looking more carefully to say, okay, here's what we think is an 80,000-year marine terrace deposit or a 120,000-year marine terrace deposit. In addition to collecting corals and shells, let's look for mammoth remains as well, because they ought to be there. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does.
Yeah. Here and then here.
I just have a very dumb question. When you find
No
the
such thing.
bones, do you leave them on the island or do you take them to a lab?
What we did in this case was just photograph everything, measure everything very, very carefully. And then I think Don Morris and some of the members of Larry Agenbrod's crew came out after we had documented everything. They carefully removed it, and it's now in the Santa Barbara Museum, I believe. In a situation like that, sometimes these things can be so delicate. It really takes someone who knows what they're doing. We can take marine terrace fossils, mollusks and shells and stuff, sieve them and get them cleaned up, and we know, how to handle those sorts of things. A big tusk, that's not within our job description. That's for someone who knows what they're doing. So we leave those.
So how do you keep Joe Blow from walking out there and chopping it up?
In this case, it's a long drive or a really long hike. But it's an issue. That's always been an issue. That's true in any national park. How do you keep anybody from doing things? It's always a perennial challenge. Yes, sir, and then George after that.
Yeah, on the evolutionary question related before that, if they're going on up to the islands at different times, instead of having a separate species, they're going to find their mates out there as they're going. And wouldn't that correlate to the gray whale right now on two sides of the Pacific would have to be, by that same argument, separate species, but they're not.
Yeah.
And they are finding each other. They're finding out now they're interbreeding too. But
Organisms find each other,
yeah.
don't they? That's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about the parallel with the whales, but that's interesting. Yeah. George.
I have a geological puzzle which probably has a very easy answer, and you would know it.
I don't know.
All your marine terraces are interglacial.
Yes,
Couldn't you have a glacial period long enough to make?
absolutely. There's one offshore. Actually, there's about 4 or 5 offshore. Actually, K.O. Emery from Scripps mapped them in the late 50s. And they've been studied subsequently also, although they're more difficult to study. But they're all submerged because, again, if you're looking at a sea level drop of 120 meters, or at least 95 meters by the estimates we have locally here for the California coast, the uplift rate to get them out of the water and have them preserved as glacial age marine terraces, you're going to have a very, very high rate of uplift. Okay?
We don't have.
And we don't have that here, except here in Ventura and Santa Barbara. Now, that 80,000-year marine terrace that we found that's just about 4 meters above sea level on Santa Rosa Island, you know where it is? Here you see, I'm so excited I can barely speak. Here in Ventura, it's up at around 400 meters. It's up in the mountains. Okay, because the uplift rate here in Ventura is the highest in the world. Okay? In fact,
Good old
I
Santa.
think I just felt the ground jump. So if you take a drive to Santa Barbara, and you know where Pitas Point is, Muscle Shoals, you know that term? If you go off the road, well, don't go off the road, park somewhere, and at Muscle Shoals there, go over towards the coast, you'll find a marine terrace there that is about 2,000 to 5,000 years old. Okay, so that's even younger than the last glacial. Okay, if you keep going up towards Santa Barbara, the uplift rate is a bit lower there, but the UCSB campus is built on a marine terrace that dates to 49,000 years ago. Okay, 45 to 50, let's say. So where that puts you is in stage 3, right about there. Okay? Now, the only way, since that's sea level, if you converted this to a sea level, in meters over here, that's about minus 62 meters. Okay? And so the UCSB campus is up at around 12 meters above sea level, most of it. So in 45 to 50,000 years, it's been uplifted 62 plus 12 meters, what is that, 74? Okay, 74 meters and about 50,000 years. Much, much higher rate of uplift. But see, that was almost a glacial type period. It was what we call an interstadial. It was in between 2 glacials, 2 and 4. Not a full interglacial, not a full glacial. Okay? Now, if you had a super duper high uplift rate, the terrace that formed I have about 8 copies of this curve, but I'll be showing up somewhere. No. The terrace that formed during the last glacial period, in theory, could be above water, but you'd have to have a very, very high uplift rate. This has been found and mapped offshore by a group from Oregon State. It's down around 95 meters, which is about what sea level was at about that time. So it's only undergone maybe a couple of meters of uplift in the 20,000 years or so since it formed. But it's very distinct as a terrace. They took a submersible down there and with some kind of a James Bond arch enemy mastermind type claw device went out and collected some mollusks from it, got radiocarbon dates, sure enough, the last glacial age. So, yep. Back there and then here. Yes?
So I was just curious to see that some of these fossils and other artifacts could possibly be underwater around the islands.
Oh, sure.
Are there any talks of, I mean, obviously it'd be really expensive and complicated to do that, but to do some kind of archaeological find and find stuff like that?
Yeah, and in geology too, I want my own project submersible. Congress just will not listen. I asked for a fleet and then narrowed it down to just half a dozen and I still won't buy it for me. But yes, it's interesting. Are any of the park archaeologists? Yes, nautical work.
Well, I mean, we've had a graduate researcher interested in that, but again, it's a funding issue and it's also
Expensive.
a jurisdiction issue.
Yeah, well, that's right, that's right. Yeah. In some places, this is a whole subfield of archaeology that's a really big deal. In Israel, there's so much submerged archaeology. There at Haifa University, there's a Department of Nautical Archaeology. How's that for specializing? So I need to have them fly their submersibles out here.
University of North Carolina has one.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
In fact,
They found the monocle.
Yeah.
wouldn't obviously if they evolved into pygmy mammoths on the island, there should be evidence of big boys out on the islands too.
There is.
But they would be submerged under the water.
No, they find them on land too.
Well, have you ever found any evidence of big boys out on these islands?
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, yeah,
I didn't know that.
Larry Agenbrough's found it. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
there's probably about as many Columbian mammoths as there are pygmy mammoths.
Mhm.
And they date to the last glacial period too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep. No question about it. Yes, sir.
When the islands were privately owned and what little research may have been done out there in those years,
Uh-huh.
did the things that were found go to universities or to museums? And being part of the national park now, are they technically under the offices of the Department of the Interior? Are they owned by the Department of the Interior now? Anything that's found on the islands?
I'm going to let Kate take that one. In the past, there were, in a short answer, there were a lot of things collected in the Channel Islands that ended up in museums in Europe. Very poor documentation, poor provenance, and some of it really shameful. But other stuff ended up in museums and is well documented. And then as far as jurisdiction is concerned,
We don't own materials that were collected.
okay.
Well, currently, stuff that's found, like
But,
this week or something.
anything now, yes.
The Department of Interior is actually the,
Yeah, we are, the Park Service is the owner, and all collections happen under a permit
Yeah.
at this time. But there were legitimate scientists that were working on the islands during the
Oh, yeah.
time of private ownership, like we talked about.
Sure.
Phil Orr,
Phil Orr,
that was-
yeah.
So
That's
there
right.
was, some of it was handled maybe somewhat similar to how it would today, but we don't own those materials.
There
Most
were
museum and, pardon me?
There were expeditions that went out in the late 30s, early 40s from the LA County Museum.
Okay.
And they were specifically, in fact, Chester Stock, and he was.
That's right.
one of the first
Stock and
ones
Furlong
that
were the ones
yeah,
that made the first
collected,
documentation
yeah.
of pygmy
well,
mammoths.
similar research going on like in Catalina that's owned by the Catalina Island Conservancy.
Oh, yeah. It's the poor woman who's in charge of the research program and resource management program is woefully underfunded and has incredible challenges compared to islands that have restricted access, like the Navy Islands,
Mhm.
the National Park Service Islands. As she described it, she gets every crazy cat lady coming across the boat, and she
Yeah.
said for plants, like invasives and so
Yeah.
on, she said if you buy it in the nursery department at Home Depot, we get it.
Yeah.
And so, you remember at the Channel Islands symposium where we were talking about all this stuff, and everyone was just aghast at what this poor woman had to deal with in terms of management strategy. And a lot tougher situation where there was easy access
Sure.
by the public, and in fact, residents.
Yeah.
And somebody has a pet
Cats and
raccoon or
dogs.
something, and they decide, I'm tired of this thing, let it go out. It's an island, what the heck, we can go out. And you've got a new invasive species. Yes, sir.
I'm trying to understand again the motivation of these behemoths to swim out
I was
there.
hoping somebody would ask that. Actually, interestingly enough, Don Johnson came up with this one as well, in that very same paper. It turns out mammoths are tremendously good sensors of smell, okay? And because there were not other competing mammals eating the vegetation on the Channel Islands, they were lush by comparison with parts of the mainland where there were animals.
Competitors?
grazing. Yeah. So they could smell that if the wind were blowing in the correct direction for that smell to get wafted over to them. So what Don did was look at records of past wind during the last glacial period. So he went out and looked at the cemented sand dunes on San Miguel Island, measured the high angle foreset dips, which is the old avalanche face type you like to roll down as a kid when you went to a sand dune park somewhere, okay? Those are called foresets. That's always pointing downwind. He measured where those were nicely cemented, as George Roberts can tell you, out on San Miguel Island. They pointed to the southeast, meaning the winds came from the northwest, which meant that if mammoths were out smelling their trunks on the mainland, they could smell it and they say, there's a lot of salads out there. And so that was part of the motivation. There's a lack of competition, the resources out there as opposed to the mainland.
But it could have been fear from some other,
Yeah, that's another possibility is predator fear.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
okay.
And they probably wouldn't smell predators out there either. So, variety of motivations, resources and predators.
Okay.
Like most human beings, everything's
Right.
you know driven by either hunger or fear, right? Not love, peace. One last question.
Well, given that Palos Verdes is sometimes called the ninth island, and
Yep.
it's always been connected, or has been connected to mainland,
No.
we don't find
It has
pygmies?
not always been connected to the mainland. During the last interglacial period, it was an island.
So does it have both Colombian and?
I would love to find out. Unfortunately, it's awfully hard these days. It's so developed
Yeah.
compared to what it was. I don't know of reports of mammoths out there, but that's an intriguing idea. A really intriguing idea. In theory, they ought to be there. Yeah. Okay,
Well,
thank you.
on behalf of- I just say this national park has a lot of resources that are incredible, and fortunately, we can count Dan as one of the island resources, not one of the older ones, one of
Well, there
the
you
more
go.
recent ones. He's
Not that
contributed a lot. He is a wealth of information, and he loves to share it. So thank you.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.